As you're taking a seat, I know that there are name tags, or not name tags, but roles. Some of the roles that you have as family engagement professionals, I know they're out on the table. But I want to ask that, and I think we're going to have, probably enough to fill people at every table, so we're good. Well, thank you very much. I want to acknowledge your words, Carla. I think that when we met, what I saw was an absolutely passionate individual about education. And we met at a week-long conference on, it was called the Western Regional Institute for Community Health Educators. And I remember just how strongly we bonded, ourselves and then another friend of ours. And I was always just captivated by the passion that goes along with education. I remember when I was about 13, 14 years old, and it was a summertime because I remember it was hot. I was sitting on the couch at home. And I lived with my mom, my two younger brothers, and my dad. And it was close to the time that my dad got home. I had gotten home from school. And I was sitting on the couch, and I remember having a soda next to me, and I was studying. You know, and studying involves opening a book, sitting down, relaxing, getting that serotonin flowing, and getting in the flow. And I remember my dad, I could hear the car coming into the garage. And a few moments later, he walked in. It was hot. It was a summer day. And he worked in a factory. He worked in a steel-making factory. So when he walked in, you could see that look of tiredness on his body. His clothes looked tired. They were filled with oil and all the things that happened, you know, while he worked in that factory. I remember sitting there with the book open and looking up and looking at him, looking at me. And he looked at me sitting there on the couch with a cool drink next to me. And the look on his face was he was about to explode. Because he had come in from a day, probably a 14-hour day, because he used to leave at 4 or 5 in the morning every day to go to work. And he used to come home about 5 or 6 in the afternoon. And he looked at me, and my mom, who was in the kitchen, looked at him, looking at me. And she said, "Leave him alone." And I remember, she said, "Déjalo en paz. Leave him alone." And they looked at each other, and I remember my mom's words. "He's working just as hard as you do, but in a different way. This is what you're working for. This is what you're leaving as a legacy." She didn't use the word legacy. I don't remember what it was, but now I understood. This is what you're leaving him with, an education. And at that moment, I understood the value of education, because it's something he never had. But he believed in it. And he worked so many hours every day to give us what he didn't have, an education. And my mom's words were amazing, because while she didn't have more than a 6th grade education, she really wanted us to continue ours way into the future. And she said, "This will open up new doors. This is why we came to this country." That's the beginning of my story around education. That's when I first really learned to value it, because at that moment it could have gone in a number of different ways. But they both demonstrated a value for education and other values. And I want to ask you, starting off, what are some of those values that, in my own simple story, what did they demonstrate? What values did they demonstrate? It's not a good sign. What values did they demonstrate? Think about the families you work with. What would something like that demonstrate? A love for learning. A love for learning. Perseverance. Sacrifice as a value. Perseverance. A love for learning. What else? You can do it. You can do it attitude, right?
Yeah, you can do attitude, and also belief in it. You have the capacity. There's two different beliefs.
And what values may we bring those under? That belief, that attitude, the you can do it attitude, I believe in you, you have the capacity. What are the values that we can name those to?
It's a belief in your child. That's how I would see it. A belief in your child is all that all capable.
Okay. Okay. Trust. Perhaps trust. Most of the time, values are named with just one word, right? Otherwise, they do become beliefs or attitudes, which are more descriptive. But what are those values that we can name? And I ask you this because when our children go to school, they're taught the school's values, right? Our little 8-year-old goes to a school, and they're the Culverdale Koalas. Culverdale with a C and koalas with a K. And she loves being a koala. She's like my little koala, right? She's this little bundle of I won't say fur, a little bundle of joy, a little koala. But she knows her values. And when I ask parents, when I work with parents, what are your child's values at school? And some of the parents can kind of recite them. And then we quickly switch to, what are your values at home? Whoa, that kind of stops them cold in their tracks. Because while kids know what their values are at school, how should a koala behave in the lunch area? How should a koala behave in the hallways? How should a koala be? What defines a koala? The same answer doesn't come so easily for parents. And it's interesting because I always ask parents, do you teach your kids your values? Of course. Of course. We've been teaching these values from the moment they were born. And they say, yes, you're absolutely right. Why can't you name them? Why can't your kids name them? But yet they can name the koala's values. And it's interesting because those values, when they're set up as the expectations for behaviors, the expectations for how we could view the world through the lens of respect, through the lens of perseverance, through the lens of a love for learning, through the lens of appreciation and trust, and some of the other values you pointed out, right? We view the world through that lens because we have no other lens to view it through. Those values were instilled in us, and everything we do in the world goes through that lens of values. And the topics that we choose for our professional development are based on our values. How many of us would invest in a topic of dishonesty? Hey, let's go learn about how to be dishonest. Let's go learn about how to be unjust, how to behave that way, unjustly, unfairly, unlovingly. We don't. The things we choose and the way we choose to respond to the world, whether it's through thoughts or feelings, it's based on our values. And so I want to do something here real quick with you guys. All right, so I'll just put a couple of these sheets out on every table. I guess I don't need 25 for each table. Thank you, Carla. Just one for each person. So what I'd like to ask you to do is I'd like you to take one of these sheets of paper, whatever color draws you are drawn to, and some of you already have markers, and I'll put out a couple of markers on each table. I realize I'm putting out yellow. That's probably not a good color to put out, right? I'll put a couple of these markers out there. What I'd like to ask you to do is let's make a little name tent. Maybe a little two-fold, so you fold 1/3 and then 1/3, and make a little name tent. And I'll put some of these markers out here. And if you could put your name on each on your name tent, if you could add your name, Let's see, washable markers. Okay, these are, I think, safe. All right. So if you could put your name on your name tent. It's interesting because as we add our name, I always say when I do icebreakers, so tell me your name. What is your name? And what do you like to be called? And oftentimes we find a difference, right? The name is just a way of identifying ourselves as human beings. Identifying each other, not just saying, hey, you, and everyone turns their head. We were given a name. But is that truly who we are? So go ahead and put down your name. Whether it's your given name or whether it's the name you like to be called. By the way, this is the arts and crafts portion of this presentation. Enjoy it. Okay, Flor, yours is ready. I like it. It looks good. Ceci is ready. Catalina. Angela. Michelle. Coordinator and director. Oh no, that's not a name tag. That's okay. Janet is over there. Okay. All right. And then tell me how you pronounce your name. Is it Micaela?
In Spanish, yes.
Uh-huh.
But in my family's Irish Italian.
Uh-huh.
Michaela.
Michaela.
I speak Spanish and work in Spanish.
Ah, so you answer to both. Michaela. Very nice, thank you. All right, so as I see your names and I want to thank you for that. So this is what we're called. But you know, there's this saying that says that people may not remember your name, but they certainly will remember how you treated them, right? And as family engagement professionals, you will have an impact on a family's life based on what you do. And you may get to know that family very intimately because they'll tell you stories. They'll tell you stories about how they got here, why they got here, what they're working for, what they hope for their family, what's their vision for their family. And you might remember some of those individuals, the faces. We may forget the names, but we'll remember the face and how we were treated when we visit them or work with them or interact with them. But that's not who we are, guys. That's what our name is. This is what our name is. We view the world not through the lens of our name. We view the world through the lens of our values. So to understand our behaviors and to understand what we do, how we influence others, there's a reflection on our values that I want to ask us to do. So I shared with you a little bit of my story, and that's just one moment in time. A cathartic moment for me, actually, because it really gave me an understanding of how much my parents valued education and how hard they were willing to work for it. Hard enough so my dad contained himself when my mom said, that's what you're working for. And he's working just as hard. So I asked you to help me understand some of those values by naming some of them that might have been demonstrated in that moment. So now what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to name 5 values, maybe the 5 values that you work to uphold or champion every day. Every day. And what I mean by uphold and champion, that no matter where you are, no matter who you're with, no matter what you're doing, those are the 5 values that you work to make sure they're there. No matter where you are, what you're doing, or who you're with. Place them around your name. Write those values, your 5 values, your top 5 values around your name. Thank you. All right. Now, I heard a couple of values that were the same among some of you who spoke. Which ones did you hear that were the same amongst the folks that spoke? Michelle? Love. Yeah, love. I think almost everyone had love. Yeah. Claudia doesn't have love, but she has trust. That's okay. We're getting there. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. That seems to be an underlying value for most of us, an underlying one. But besides just kind of passively, right? Just kind of passively believing that love is a value, what are we actively doing? Because this is something, like I mentioned, that we're championing. What are those that we're championing, defending, upholding every single day? because this is what we do. These are decisions we make in our daily lives, in our families that we work with, make decisions around these values. The difference now is you've named them. You've said, this is my name as a human being. I am called Flor. But Flor isn't who she is. Who she is are the values that she just named. Right? Lelia. If we want to know who Lelia is, who she is, now we do. We know what she's called as a human being. That just differentiates her from the billions of other individuals on this planet, right? But who she is, her essence, truth, trust, belief, knowledge and love. This is what we can expect. These are the types of thoughts and feelings and behaviors and the paradigms that she possesses are based on these values. Now, I'm not saying that we, in everything we do, that we're perfect about behaving this way. Like honesty, for example. Who has honesty written down in there as one of your core values, right? Difficult, right? Carla's sitting there with Daniela, and she says, hey, Daniela, you said you didn't have homework the whole week. And I just talked to your teacher, and she says you did. That you didn't turn your homework in this whole week. What's up with that? In our family, honesty is really important. In our relationship, honesty is really, really important. All of a sudden, the phone rings. Oh, who is it? It's your dad. Oh, no. Tell him we're busy. Right? Tell him we're busy. I can't take his call right now. Right? Where'd that whole honesty talk go? Right? So sometimes we have these values, and we try to uphold them, but we can't in every situation. It's very challenging to do so in every situation, right? So there are times when in a family, and the families I've worked with, that happens. They say that a value is very important for the family, and yet at some moment, in some situation, it's very difficult to uphold that value. And then what do? How do they feel? And what do we say when we speak with them and they share this kind of stuff with us? Did they fail? Is this a learning opportunity? How do we manage that? How do we manage that for ourselves? Now, I asked you how many of you heard the same value among some of the people that shared. So I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to ask you that at the table where you're sitting, I'm going to ask you to identify the common values that you have at your table. Okay? That's the first part. What common values do you have at your table? That's the first part. Second part, how do you demonstrate them? Check in with each other and say, oh, if love, if trust is something we all have in common, awesome. That's the first part. The second part is, how do you demonstrate trust? How do you demonstrate trust? And how do you? And I think you'll find something really interesting which we'll look at once we have all the tables. Complete those two things. What are the common values, and how does each person demonstrate those values? Okay? So I'll take a few minutes to do that, please, at your table. I like that. It never works. It never works. Okay. Let's come back. You guys are having some really interesting conversations that I heard at each table. Thank you for coming back. And thank you for the discussions. It's a very interesting dialogue when we get into, especially the part about how do we demonstrate values that we each say we have in common. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let me hear from any table who wants to share, kind of a recap of your conversation. What values did you have in common at your table? And then share with us how you each demonstrate that value differently.
Let's name it.
Yeah, let's name it. Let's name it. And if we name it, We can really have a great dialogue about it. It's out on the table. There's nothing hidden, nothing uncomfortable about it. Why should there be when we talk about values? And why do parents not do this more often? Why is it not done in families? I won't ask you. How many of you do this in your family? How many of you have sat down and really clearly laid out the values, and just as simply, it doesn't have to be a great amount of work, just as simply as this. How many of us know what those family values are? Family, X, but then individually, how many of us have done this with our kids? Because they're raised from the same core values as ours. We create those core values, but then eventually those values do change. As they become kind of free thinkers and are not so dependent on us to tell them what to do, to tell them how to think. They become free thinkers. Their values do evolve from that core set of values. So is it useful then to help parents understand where they source those thoughts, behaviors, feelings, decisions? Okay. And when we do that, I think that we start to do something that is also very important in working with families, and that's validation. Because when you start to validate their experience, when you start to look inside at what drives them, and really take the time to help get that out, that's a form of validation. And I think that also begins to develop a deeper trust within a family when you're able to validate the experience. And they have a lifelong experience they'd probably love to share with you. Individually, how old are the parents? A lifetime of experience really developing those values. And perhaps never putting them on the table. As a couple, as the parents of these kids or step-parents or care providers of these kids, maybe they've never sat down to compare their set of values. Maybe the family relationship could possibly get better if I understood, that's why my partner is always, that's why he always, right? That's why she says and does, and, right? That's why she gets so unnerved about. That's why he is so adamant about. That's why. And so maybe establishing this really does validate the experience, develop deeper trust. So let's talk a moment about validation. What is validation? First of all, what is that? What is validation? Recognize their strengths. Wonderful. So recognize their strengths, their struggles, their experience, right? Because from the experience, we could certainly draw a lot of strengths, right? In spite of yourself, here you are. In spite of everything you are, here you are. Let's take a look at how strong you are in order to get to this point in your life. Right? So yes, from that, you can find the strengths. What else? What else is validation? So recognition, acceptance. Yes, acceptance. Isn't it so cool when you have a friend who just simply accepts you as you are? They might even like you for just being who you are. Not just acceptance, but actually like you.
Behave yourself.
Yes.
Be yourself, enjoy yourself, because you're being accepted.
Yes.
It's a wonderful, experience.
It is. So what does it take? What does it take to accept someone for who they are? At times, and let me ask you this again, I won't ask you to raise your hands. Let me just ask you this. How many times have we gone in to see a family and we really would love to change them? Deep down, okay, I can tell who it was. You don't need to raise your hand, Jeanette. I can tell from the laughter. Right? How many of us have ever done that? We're sitting there with a parent and we think, man, I'm going to make sure that they do things differently, and we want to change them. But in order to change someone, and we haven't even talked about where that change might come from, is it going to come externally from me, or is it going to come externally from them? Can I really motivate someone to change, or can I influence their motivation process? Can I really empower them, that overused, incorrectly used process? No, I can't empower. No, I can't motivate, but I can certainly influence.
I think our relationship.
Part of what I do on a regular daily basis as a learning and development manager for a nonprofit organization that works with community leaders up and down California and many other states is I work with individuals who have kind of come out of their shell, who have kind of come out of that paradigm of the worker. Many folks in our working class communities are used to getting up every day, being told when to get up because that alarm clock comes on, being told they have to be at a certain place at a certain time in order to make a certain amount of money. It's a mindset. And it's so ingrained. So when you start to ask them these types of questions about what are your values, what is your vision, wow guys, it's kind of a tough stretch for some. Because they're not used to sometimes thinking for themselves. Their life is pretty much a series of tasks, and someone else manages those tasks or activities. And here we are as family strengthening professionals in any one of these roles that we play, whether we're a coordinator or director, or whether we're a nurse, whether we're an educator, a home-based specialist, whatever our role is called, whatever our function is with these families, here we are coming to them and saying, hey, you're leaders here. There's a leadership component to being a parent. Dad is not just a provider and a worker. Mom is just not a cook and a laundry person. While she may cook very well, right? That's not her primary role. And we're trying to convince people of this who are told what to do every day. And society certainly doesn't help either. But this is what we're kind of up against. This is part of the challenge. And so the validation, going back to validation, the validation of their experience really helps a lot of families understand, oh man, I didn't realize, I never reflected on how much it takes in order to get a family to do this and that and to make it this far, whatever it is that they've done. And whatever it is that they've done is something you're going to help them uncover. Because you value honesty, because you value love, because you value your family, your kids, you've done lots around those values. And we want to bring that out and really validate that experience. Because this is going to really help us help them understand what leadership is about. Not how to cook better, not how to provide better nutrition, because that keeps them in that role. That keeps mom in the role of cook. Mom is a lot more than that. Mom's visionary. Dad is visionary. They've got a vision. It's sometimes hidden under the everyday tasks and responsibilities of being a provider, of being a home coordinator, of all those activities. Where's the leadership part? How do we validate that leadership role that many of these parents want to have when you entice them with it? That enticement, because you can't pour it into their heads and just expect that they say, oh yeah, leadership, now I understand. Now I'm going to change my role in the family. You can't just do that. And it reminds me of a saying that says, and it's a leadership saying, and it's a very powerful one. You may not think so right now, but you'll think about this one. If you want to build a ship, do not call your people together and have them gather wood. Instead, instill in them a longing for the open sea. Think about that. Parents will never truly control their kids' future as much as they'd like to. Parents will never protect their kids 100% as much as they'd like to. Will never fully harbor them from all the horrible things they might see in life. All the things that hurt as much as they'd like to. So you've got to be able to create this strength in a parent to let go of the child. And you do that through validating the experience. You are strong. You're able to motivate. You're able to guide your child until the point that they take off and make their own decisions. And you're going to be able to be okay with that. Because as a leader, you know you can't control your people. You can't just tell your kids, bring this wood. You need to inspire them. A great leader knows how to inspire, not just how to yell out orders. So this is what part of the leadership role is about, is inspiring parents. This is part of your leadership role, our leadership role, as we work to strengthen parents and families, is to inspire them to want to be leaders. And they in turn will inspire their kids to want to do great things. That starts with validating. So I want to ask you guys to do something. I want to ask you to, I don't know, how many of you are seated at a table where you know each other, where you maybe have worked, or maybe you work together, you come from the same agency, you see each other frequently at meetings. Anyone here seated at a table with your close friends? No? Okay, good, perfect. I'm going to ask you to do this. It may be a little uncomfortable at first. It may be. Throughout the entire 1 minute, I'm going to ask you to do this, okay? But I'm going to ask you to turn, and let's see, we need to work in pairs. So I know that in some tables you might need to, or I'm going to ask you to move to, actually there's 3 of you here, there's 2 pairs, two pairs back there, 1 pair here, 1 pair here. So these 2 tables, may I ask one of you to work with one of you so that we have a pair? Yes? Flor, would you mind? Okay, thank you. By default, she's the closest, so she'll move over. Thank you very much, Flor. Okay, so you each have a partner. So, okay. And we'll ask you guys to figure out who wants to work with who. All right? All right, so here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to turn to the person that you choose to work with in this pair. And I'm going to ask you to just look in their eyes, look at each other in the eyes for 1 minute. 1 minute. I didn't say you could breathe, but my gosh, it sounds like you held your breath for a minute. Yeah, I didn't ask you to hold your breath, just look at each other. Okay, so let me ask you, how did that feel? How did that feel? Okay, so the validation part becomes a little uncomfortable at first, but it's interesting how you point out, Flor, that one of the things that we start to look at is perhaps people's experiences. And there's a lot to be said with just a few moments of contact. In a few moments, especially if there's some very powerful things moving through another individual, you can sense that and you can see it in people's eyes. And there's an instant validation just on the level of humanness that I love this video, and without anything further, I want to share this with you. It's a 4-minute video. I'd like us to really just take a look at the power of validation through this. I don't know if anyone else has seen this, but let me see if I can. Incredible power in validation, especially towards building trust, to get people to open up, to get people to connect on just the strength of the everyday struggle, of going through the everyday struggle. That's really what this is about. We are different. Perhaps we're blessed in different ways in the families that we work with. We're in a position to support with our knowledge, with our jobs. But you know, sometimes we have to speak the same language. And this to me just really draws out an incredible set of feelings and tears, because we don't do this very often. This is not something that social media can replace. It's not. I think as much as possible, the face-to-face contact really, well, you can't replace that. It's hard to put in words what some of us are feeling. It's hard to put in words. What does this do? What does this do? This touches in a very different way. And we have the power to touch our families with validation. We're talking about validation. Different ways of doing it. Holding our eyes for just a few moments may seem uncomfortable at first. But once you break through the ice and you start the giggling, it's different. Let me ask you what your thoughts are and what your feelings are at the moment, just around this validation in this way, without words. You with words, but not, what I'm saying is the validation without words. What's going on? Yes. That's really cool. That's really, really cool because most relationships, most romantic relationships usually don't start off like, wow, you look really great. Let's spend our life together. Usually there's some dating involved. There's some trust building involved, right? Some sense of who you are and who I am. Let's share that and let's see if we can get along and move this forward. Same with families. Same with our work with families. Let me ask you at this point, because you brought it up, Carla, how will you implement this a sense or idea of validation? How will you implement this with your family? Would you take a moment and just talk with each other at your tables? And then we'll hear from each table and see if we can get some really creative ways of validating a family's experience, especially the parents that we're working with. And even the kids, even the old, the kids at any age. How will we use this validation with our families? Would you take a moment and chat with the folks next to you? All right. Let's come back from your conversations, please. And this should be interesting. I've heard some very interesting thoughts about how to apply this with families. And that's the question. That was the question for you guys at the tables. How do we apply validation? Whether it's through something like this and making eye contact, or what was shared a little bit earlier. How would you apply, or what would you do to apply validation with the families that you work with? Let's hear some thoughts from the tables. That's great. That's great. I like that. The idea of active listening so that you're keying in on what they're saying and not just on what you're going to write, right? So, and active listening really involves a whole different mindset, doesn't it? Because you're not listening necessarily actively to then fill out the form, right? It's not this kind of superficial, let me listen so that I remember and then I can go back and fill out the form and not do this back and forth. But it's really active listening with empathy. Going back to a very core or a very fundamental human value, empathy. Let me try, while they're talking with me and sharing with me their experience, let me try and put myself in their shoes. Let me try and imagine being in that moment that they're sharing and sense what it's like for them, right? And many of them, guys, and it may happen in our own family, we may, as we become parents, we think about our own upbringing and wish that perhaps someone had treated us in a different way than they did, especially when things are tough. When things are tough, it's kind of hard. Mom, I'd like, I can't give you that. Oh, you're so mean. Well, you can think what you want. I can't give you that. And so sometimes struggle really creates a perception that they didn't love me. I hear that a lot from people. Well, my parents really didn't love me because they didn't give me a lot of things. I hear that a lot. And I hear a lot of parents thinking, well, I don't want my child to think that I don't love them. So I want to try and give them the things I didn't have. Right? And I often tell parents, maybe if you reframe things, it won't be as painful to remember those moments that cause you pain now. How do you want to how do you want to be remembered? And I always say, don't you want to be remembered as someone who did the best they could with what they had? Because your children now may not know the struggle and may not know how hard you're working to make it happen for them. They just think you're a mean parent. You don't give them what they're asking for. But you may have thought that of your parents. I always tell the parents, you may think that about your parents and the people that raised you. Why not reframe that so it's not so painful and think they did the best they could with what they had? And that probably feels better. That probably is just, a different, it sheds a different light on the people that raised you. Because we will never know what their struggle was. And so that really kind of helps as well to validate the fact that they're working so hard in their role to provide what they can. Okay? So thank you. What else? What else in terms of validation? What else did you guys come up with? Yes? Yeah. And again, daily life derails us from following that path. Going back to the word expectations that Fleur used very quickly, expectations can sometimes sound like orders to a teen. And they're at that point in time where they're being highly influenced by their parents, but the competition is now not just their circle of influence or friends and the secondary groups, it's also media, social media, music. Listen to the music that is out on popular radio, on popular streams. Oh my goodness. And I read something the other day that said that there is now a drop in the level of what do you call it? Not literacy. I'll say literacy. From 4th grade pop music, how it used to reflect a 4th grade level of literacy and education, I'll say it that way, to now 3rd grade. And I've listened to some of these artists, well, I wouldn't even call them artists, they're musicians. Musicians. Even that's a stretch. But yeah, you listen to the lyrics and it is unbelievable. And that's what draws kids. So we don't want to make it sound like orders. It goes back to the thing, bring the wood and let's do a ship, okay? But Mom, I said bring the wood. Yeah? That doesn't really inspire. We have to be better at helping parents reach in and setting out that vision in a different way. So to create a vision statement, I'll read these 4 questions and maybe we can email them to you. And I'll end with this. To create a vision statement for a family, there's 4 questions, and I love these 4 questions. First, we ask the parents, what character qualities do we want to build in our children? What are the qualities we want to build in our children? And of course, in order to do that, we have to demonstrate them. Walk the talk. Integrity. Be the person you say you want your kids to be so they know how it's done. And that touches on every aspect of life. Who are our friends? What are the activities we become involved in? How do we manage our emotions and the everyday pressure? Right? But what character qualities do we want our children to have that we want to instill in them? And more importantly, again, through our modeling of this. They'll believe our modeling more than they'll believe our words. Second question, what are some practical activities that we can do as a family to help cultivate the vision? What are we doing as a family? When we sit down at dinner, is everyone off in their own world? Taking pictures of their food and sending it out there? Mom made this delicious meal we see on that social media page, but no one ever says, Mom, thanks so much. This is really, really good. Right? So what activities can we do as a family to help cultivate the vision? The third one, how do we plan on communicating this vision to our kids? Is it a vision board? That's really awesome. When Mom and Dad sit together and bring out magazines and start to create a vision board, it really draws the attention of even adolescents. Even adolescents that are so used to the, every 5 seconds there's a different thing on the screen kind of a generation. What are we going to say about this vision to our kids? Okay? And the final question, the 4th question is, what are the rules or guides that we can, that will help us guide this family vision? What's the framework to guide the vision? Focus on what your family should do, not on what you shouldn't do. And some examples, our family makes guests in our home feel welcome by greeting them warmly, rather than don't be rude, right? What can we do rather than what can't we do? Our family will be initiators of friendships and always be the first to say hello. Right? Our family will be courageous by trying new things with an enthusiastic attitude. Okay? Those are examples. Okay? of some of the guides that we can set up so that we can actually carry this vision out. Right? And so the idea is that the koalas are congruent with the family that we're working with. Right? So I hope that all of this, that my hope, and I want to thank Carla, I want to thank Sudi, I want to thank you guys for your attention this morning. But my hope is that all of this becomes another set of tools that you don't have to draw from, where the raw material is within each of the parents and each of the families that we work with, so that we're not out there, cheering for them, but we're actually in the trenches working with them, coaching them with their own experiences to be that much stronger. So I want to thank you very much for your time this morning, and I look forward to seeing you for some more coffee. Thank you. Thank you, Carla.